Last episode, we introduced you to the intricate workings of the People's Kingdom of Volcadia, all leading up to the world of today. Now, we'll talk about the politics of this world, starting with broad strokes and going into a climactic event. Before watching this video, remember to check out my main channel and Micah's Discord server. Beyond this, remember to share my videos and keep up the discussion, for only comments promoting blasphemy against the Lord will be taken down. And now, on with the video. Volcadia's diplomatic relations are rather tight, as the world is stuck in a cold war between the liberal British Commonwealth and communist Soviet Union. These nations are starkly divided against each other with a supreme goal to become the dominant power in the world. Now, what side is Volcadia on? The answer? Neither. Volcadia plays a very careful diplomatic game with each side, as both sides viewed the People's Kingdom as a lesser evil. This way, Emperor Frederick is able to enforce peace by having each side scramble to earn his approval with favorable trade deals and other acts of diplomatic alliance. While both of those sides work to keep Volcadia in its place. Volcadia is on the side of peace in the Cold War, pushing diplomacy and neutrality where other nations continue in their conflicts. However, just because Emperor Frederick is in favor of neutrality in the Cold War doesn't mean that all Volcadians or that all nations are at peace with Volcadia. Under his rule, Volcadia's main mission is to preserve and further unite its colonial empire, turning from an imperial state with surrounding dominions into a federation of equals in which Volcadia's rule is further consolidated. Once again, I've told you this in the last episode, this is not a transformation into democracy. Quite the opposite, but a goal of national unity. This inherently means that Volcadia has its opponents, most notably in the Republic of China, which fought a brutal war against Volcadia back in the 1930s. During this war, Volcadian forces nearly occupied much of China and attempted to establish a new government, but were forced to retreat by fanatic guerrillas led by the dictator Li Wei. Positioning himself as an anti-colonial hero, Li Wei developed a cult of personality while making life hell for the ordinary Chinese civilian. The execution of teachers and monks, the forced replacement of Chinese logographs with pinyin, the destruction of minority languages as undemocratic, and daily crucifixions meant that even Chinese people themselves, who once hated the Volcadians, fled to the People's Kingdom as refugees and even joined in colonial armies to fight back to possibly, maybe return China back to the people. However, the Li Wei regime is very clever. Their mission is officially to fight for democracy against the authoritarian and colonial Volcadians, leaving democratic nations throughout the world in favor of them. Through this, they've managed to secure an alliance with the British Commonwealth and develop lots of relations with Ethiopiana as they work together to fight in Korea against the pro-Volcadia government. Through this, a new ideology has been created, that of democratic exceptionalism. This ideology you'll find out a lot more later in the series, but the idea is that democracy is the only valid government according to the staunch principles of this ideology, and that any nation that is not democratic must inherently be taken down. Because of this ideology, Sino-British partnership began to divide itself. You see, Britain is way more in favor of opposing the Soviet Union than China is. Yeah, the Chinese lost Manchuria, but the British, their effort is solely focused on China, well, on the Soviets, whereas the Chinese, their efforts are focused largely on becoming a more powerful nation. They want to dominate the continent and get rid of Wolcadian influence. But the British just want to oppose the spread of the Iron Curtain. Now, how good is China as an ally? Well, let's see. During the Hungarian Revolt of 1956, Soviet forces came right back in to negotiate with the rebels, essentially bringing them under their command. Due to this notion of socialism with a human face, the communists managed to unite Germany, preventing the need for a Berlin Wall. The Soviets also managed to spread communism to Greece, leaving Cyprus as a British satellite state and exile republic. The final nail in the coffin for the British Commonwealth was the communist-backed disunity of Italy, with the northern side of the country existing as a supposed neutral social democracy. Because of that, the British realized they couldn't get a true alliance with China. Rather, they could only be used by them. Frantically searching for new allies, the British soon realized that the only one nation that could be a genuine ally with the British Empire is the People's Kingdom of Wolcadia. But there's a bit of a problem here. You see, they'd have to deal with a lot of internal opposition to an alliance with Wolcadia. A Tory Prime Minister would be seen as the coalition from the last elements of aristocracy in Britain, ready to ally with Wolcadia to continue the empire of old and fight against current democracy. A Labour Prime Minister would be just the same, though this time a rejection of social democracy and more the arrival of authoritarian socialism akin to the Soviet Union. Second of all, there was another dilemma. Why would the Wolcadians enter an alliance with the British Empire? After all, Britain has not been Wolcadia's best friend. The two nations had a long history of territorial and ideological disputes. The British Empire stole Wolcadian land and granted it to the Dominion of Canada, the latter having treated the Wolcadians poorly by forcefully assimilating them into their nation while still acting as if they're second-class citizens. Don't forget that the British kept Wolcadia out of joining the Allies in World War II. What's worse, the British had another thing up its sleeve. The Soviets have been increasingly hostile towards Wolcadia, even threatening direct involvement in the Korean War through their vassal state in Manchuria. Although the Soviets were incapable of acting on that threat due to their territorial dispute with China, Khrushchev's attitude towards Wolcadia was far different than that of Stalin. You see, Stalin was generally a friend of Wolcadia because the Soviet Union under Stalin and the Wolcadians had very similar interests. However, Khrushchev, as a more powerful nation and one of the great powers in the world, wanted to bring the Soviet Union into its own sphere. But there is some good news in Britain. That is good for its own internal support of an alliance with Wolcadia, but potentially bad with a support from, with getting an alliance with Wolcadia. The British were under the leadership of the Liberal Party, under a moderate prime minister, Sir Edward Langley. Raised in France, he was both a strong believer in democracy and a skilled negotiator, able to speak in 7 languages, including Wolcadian. Using his strategy, his negotiations with Wolcadia were fairly simple, as both sides came to an agreement. The Commonwealth renounced its alliance with a hostile Liyue regime in China. It also promised not to push for democratic reform within Wolcadia itself, instead allying with the Wolcadians in their various endeavors. Third, and last, the United Kingdom and her dominions apologized to Wolcadia for the loss of land and general aggression. This, initially, was a fairly good move. The Anglo-Wolcadian alliance, established during the 1960s, worked fairly well. As the Soviet march throughout Europe faded, Wolcadia also managed to secure its empire. The Korean Civil War ended with a total Wolcadian victory, as the Chinese couldn't stand against the combined might of Wolcadian and British troops. Meanwhile, in Europe, the British and Wolcadians worked together in France, preventing the nation from ceding to a communist rebellion and liberating Italy from its socialist north. Due to this, the Spanish and Portuguese gained greater faith in the Commonwealth, and the Italians were free from communist control. However, there's one problem. Remember the Ethiopians and their whole dispute with Wolcadia? Well, one of their leaders, Charles Ozerwanch, has something to say to the Wolcadian government.
People of Ethiopiana, I apologize for the abrupt nature of this speech, but something needs to be said and done about the circumstances facing our country, particularly within the international arena. The exact event mentioned is the Wolcadian alliance with Britain in the Cold War, made manifest through the Canadian apology to Wolcadia due to the perceived occupation and mishandling of supposedly rightful Wolcadian land. This territory, known to Canadians and Brits as Yukon and British Columbia, but to the Wolcadians as Narstland, was sold to Canada in a way that some may describe as forceful. However, one question remains strong. If the Wolcadians are so adamant about reclaiming their land back, why don't they give us ours? Wolcadia continues its colonial oppression over Tartan and Ostcliff, territories that rightfully belong to us. Now, one could say that this apology was a part of a genuine effort from the British Commonwealth to make amends for their colonial empire. However, one would wonder why the Govariat people, a Wolcadian minority, were not included in this apology. In reality, this apology was made for 2 reasons. First, the British sought to validate Wolcadia as an ally and a nation that is owed by the rest of the world. By doing this, they justify their cooperation with imperial powers to shield them from their own ineptitude. Despite all this supposed effort about protecting democracy, Emperor Frederick of Wolcadia is a dictator, and allying with him makes your nation just as bad as the Soviets. I have addressed the situation at hand, and now I shall address the actions taken to resolve it. I have passed 3 new laws to help secure our own democracy and combat authoritarianism abroad. First, I have passed the Lingual Diversity Act, pertaining to the languages spoken by Ethiopiana's people. Traditionally, we have operated on a trilingual system between English, Russian, and Wolcadian as the 3 major languages spoken throughout as a lingua franca throughout our nation. During the days in which we were a unified people, that made sense for our growth and prosperity. However, due to Wolcadia's imperialist behavior, we do not want to present to them a friendly face. For this reason, Wolcadian will no longer be regarded as an official language, but merely a foreign language akin to any other language in the world. This means that Wolcadian language street signs, movies, or TV channels will no longer be provided within Ethnopiana, and that Wolcadian will no longer be taught as a native language within Ethnopiana's schools. The second law is the Political Diversity Act, aimed to protect our nation's various political parties and movements from the hands of Vilkism. Vilkism is Wolcadia's official political ideology and is very popular within our nation's Wolcadian minority. It is incredibly authoritarian in nature, with its reliance on outdated principles of perceived righteousness over objective standards of human rights. For this reason, the Ethnopianan government shall ban all Vilkis political parties and forbid Vilkis politicians from seeking re-election before renouncing their stance as Vilkists. Freedom of speech and political participation must be conditional upon a commitment to human rights and democratic values before it is abused by would-be authoritarians. Finally, I have decided to pass the Religious Diversity Act. Thorax faith, the national religion of Wolcadia, and a widely followed religion within Ethnopiana's indigenous population and Wolcadian minority, has several issues, most notably its authoritarian and monarchist bias. For this reason, we have decided to establish a new Thorakian order, one specifically within the city of Minority. This order will be subject to several regulations. First, the order shall remove all Wolcadian imagery, glorification of Wolcadian dynasties, or toxic ideals unique to the Wolcadian nation but not to Thorax faith. Second, this order shall respect other religions and sects of Thorax faith, even those that consider themselves old faith and aren't linked with dominant Thorakian governance. Last but not least, this order shall have utmost respect for the ideals of democracy, secularism, and tolerance, refusing to preach illiberal ideologies often found in monotheistic religions. We shall send details and information of the Order of Minority to the domineering Thorakian order within Coronis. If the Order of Minority is accepted, this will be an admission from conservative sects of Thorax faith that both conservative and progressive interpretations of the religion are valid, removing one part of the conservatives' justifications. However, if the Order of Minority is rejected, we will have no choice but to declare the Wolcadian interpretation of Thorax faith as an extremist sect and ban it for its lack of association with mainstream interpretations of Thorakian texts. The will of the people, particularly that of those in support of democracy, will always supersede the perceived righteousness of a divine mandate. Now, these regulations will face many criticisms. There will be those who perceive these regulations not as a defense of democracy, but instead as an authoritarian power grab. This is a dangerous misinterpretation of democratic principles and the principles set by the Ethnopianan Constitution. Freedom of speech, press, religion, and all of the rights democracy provides must not be abused by authoritarians who seek to undermine the very rights we fight for. This includes anyone who is within or supports the authoritarian Wolcadian government in their plans to expand and further centralize their colonial empire. That's why these regulations are not a necessary evil. They are a positive step in Ethnopiana's future, pointing us towards a bold and progressive ethos free from foreign influence and deliberate misinformation. Let me remind you that the Ethnopianan revolution is a social one too, so all Ethnopianans must tread the line and fight for their continued independence. By these regulations, we send a message to all authoritarian regimes who wish to defy the advancement of the Ethnopianan people.
Charles Osawanch's speech amplified the concerns. tension.